To get us started today, why don't we start with a story? It's about a woman named Joanne. Several years ago, Joanne found herself, in her words, at rock bottom. She was unemployed, a newly single mom, and she and her little girl were surviving on welfare checks. Joanne wasn't sure how she was going to support herself or her daughter, but for 5 years, Joanne had been writing a book. Yeah, 5 years. That's like almost half your lifetime.
After Joanne finished her book, she sent it to some publishers. She hoped the book could help her provide for her family, but the publishers would have to think it was good enough to print. So she sent it to a publisher, and they rejected it. She sent it to another publisher. They didn't even read it. In all, 12 publishers rejected her book. And through it all, Joanne continued struggling to make ends meet.
Finally, one day, she got the call she was waiting for. A publisher offered her $4,000 to publish her book. And 7 years after she started writing, Joanne's book was published, and people bought it. Like, a lot of people bought it. More than 100 million people, actually. You might know Joanne better as J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series. J.K. Rowling is now literally richer than the Queen of England.
Have you ever heard the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover"? I bet those 12 publishers who turned Joanne down wish they had judged her book a little differently. So, why am I talking about books today? Well, because last week we started a new series that's all about judgments we make. Because here's the deal. We tend to make judgments about people the same way a lot of those publishers judged J.K. Rowling's book. Sometimes we judge people based on a single glance or interaction. Sometimes we even judge people based on rumors we heard about them. We rush to judgment, but we don't really know their stories.
We have this way of putting people into categories. I've been a victim of it, and you probably have too. But I'm guessing you've actually done this to someone as well. I know I have. We all do it. We like to make quick judgments. We like to give people labels and make assumptions about who they are and if they're cool and why they do what they do.
And usually, we make all of these judgments based on one thing: what we see. We base our opinions on their behavior, their appearance, their mistakes, or their reputation. We really do judge people by their covers. And once we've made a judgment call about a person, it tends to determine the way we treat them.
Right now, I want you to think of someone you don't know very well, but you really dislike. It doesn't matter the reason. Got it? Okay. Now picture that person in your mind, because I've got a question for you. What if you're making a Harry Potter level mistake?
What if in this case you're just like those publishers who passed up on one of the best-selling books ever? What if you're passing up on a great person, or a potential friend, or person who's gonna do big things in the world? Or as followers of Jesus, what if we're bailing on people who we're supposed to be loving, all because of our bad judgment calls?
You know, I think we miss out on some great relationships when we judge people too quickly. And who better to teach us this than a person who knew exactly what it was like to be categorized and to be the victim of a judgment call? Her name was Rahab.
Rahab's story takes place a long time ago, when the Israelites, God's followers, were on their way to the city of Jericho, a city they planned to invade and conquer. But first, their leader Joshua sent spies into Jericho to check things out. While the spies were there, they stayed at Rahab's house. The king found out and sent his men to find them.
So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab. "Bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land." Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, "Yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk and the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them."
Did you catch that? Rahab hid the Israelite spies so they wouldn't be killed. She risked her safety to protect 2 of God's chosen people and followers. Total hero, right? Well, that's not the entire story. There's one detail I left out about Rahab. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night.
Yeah, Rahab was a prostitute. Not exactly the kind of person you might expect to be a hero in God's story. And yet, God saw beyond her book cover. He saw more than most people saw. He saw that Rahab was more than her flaws, and God used her.
Soon there was a battle where Israel's army did conquer Jericho. Afterward, Rahab and her family were invited to join the Israelites as God's followers. And they did. But Rahab's story doesn't end there. Her impact goes way beyond what she did for the spies.
In the Gospel of Matthew, which was written many years after Rahab lived, we find a long list of names that give us a family tree. Jesus' family tree, actually. And these family trees aren't the most fun things in the world to read, but if you look closely at this one, you'll find something interesting. Salmon, we read, was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab.
Rahab made Jesus' family tree. God put a prostitute into the family line of Jesus. She was Jesus' ancestor. She played a part in Jesus' story. And that wasn't an accident or an oversight. I think God was making a pretty big point. God doesn't make judgment calls based on what people see on the outside. He looks at the heart. When God looks at us, He sees our potential and a future that's even bigger than the one we can imagine for ourselves.
But we forget this sometimes. We judge people based on the little bit we can see. The way they look, the way they talk, the things they do, and what people say about them. But no matter how well we know someone, we'll never know their whole story. We don't know their motives. We don't know what happened at home last week. We don't know what kind of hurt or insecurities or fear they're dealing with. And we definitely don't know their future or what God has planned for them. We don't know what He's already up to in their life, even now.
So the next time we're tempted to judge someone, what if we remember that we don't know their whole story? What if instead of rushing to judgment, we try to see people as God sees them? What if instead of assuming the worst, we decide to assume the best? Like we learned from the story of Rahab, let's remember this. Before you judge someone, assume the best.
And how can you do that? Well, first, ask God to show you what He sees in them, because He sees a lot more than we do. Then, choose to believe the best possible story about them. Maybe that person you think is a total jerk is actually going through something really hard at home and lashing out because they're hurting inside. Or maybe that person with a bad reputation really wants to turn their life around, but they're not sure where to start. Imagine how different your school or friend group would be if everyone decided to believe the best story about each other.
So try it. Before you judge someone, assume the best. When you do, I think you'll start to see a lot more potential and a lot more good in others than you ever did before. It's a simple step, but I think it can change our relationship with others and our own hearts too in a big way. When we assume the best, we start to see and love other people like God does. So this week, don't judge a book by its cover. Instead, assume the best.